You are hands down the world's #1 narcissism expert. You also have been a victim of narcissistic abuse. So what high price did you pay, and what lessons do you actually wish you'd learned sooner?
I'd say the high price I paid and continue to pay is I'm riddled with self-doubt. I chronically second-guess myself. I often blame myself. I don't always feel safe in the world. I am almost obsessive about details because I think that helps me stay in control. I would say those are probably some of the most problematic lingering effects for me. And I'd say that because of that, I'm not as trusting as I could be. I've really tightened my social circle a lot. I can see where it has affected me in very, very, very sort of permanent kinds of ways. Yeah.
God, thank you for being so honest. What lessons do you wish you had learned in order to have hopefully prevented you from getting to this point?
I wish I had earlier in life, a stronger sense of who I was, what I wanted to be, even if it wasn't sort of what the world wanted for me. Lisa, where it gets tricky is that, we often have these conversations with ourselves in present time. I only wish I had done this, this, and this. And that was in 2024 to have that conversation about 1988 doesn't make sense because the rules were different back then. The opportunities that would be open, the way the world would regard me, especially as a woman of color. We have to recognize that things have changed, maybe not enough, but in 36 years or 40 years, things have changed. And so things that I feel like I could do now were simply not possible then. The resources, the knowledge, the information. So when I feel like I want to be hard on myself, I have to recognize that it's actually a damned miracle that I'm doing all the things I'm doing, given how much doubt is in my mind about everything, right? But I really do wish that I didn't care as much or measure myself against what I thought other people would want of me, that if I felt that the thing I wanted was going against the grain and what most people were doing, that was okay. I would do things that I thought were going to please other people. And if I pleased other people, then I would be loved. That's really what it was. Like if I did what the other people wanted, if I delivered on what people wanted, perfectionism, but in the way that wasn't that I thought I could be perfect, but it was almost as though I was trying to be a mind reader. If I could figure out what people wanted and deliver on that, then everything would be okay. Does that make sense? So if I could do exactly those things, then maybe those people would be content. Maybe they would be happy. Maybe they'd even notice me or recognize me. And I think that quest of wanting to be seen and heard and understood were very, very, compelling for me all of my life. And I think I had to get to this place of sort of this unique kind of indifference, of just not caring, of not caring what people thought, of doing the things that matter to me, even if it did go against the grain. But for me to get to this place, it was, I talk in the book about going to the tiger's cage. I must have gone to the tiger's cage 10,000 times and gotten torn apart 10,000 times. And I think then there was a point at which I'm not doing this anymore. And so I don't do it anymore. But like I said, it's made my world a lot smaller. So I really do wish I had known more about how these personalities showed up, above all else, that they would never change, that there was never any pleasing these people, that I could give myself permission without guilt to disengage. But that's just a process. It's a process you have to go through. There's a part of me, Lisa, that really believes that I look at the measure of the narcissistic relationships in my life, and in every single one of them, I did everything I could have done times 100. I gave of myself in every possible way. I gave the best of myself. Nothing, unless these people could have swallowed me up whole and imprisoned me forever, they were never going to be content. I do not look back at a single narcissistic relationship in my life and wonder, could I have done more? So I have to say that that's a tremendous relief. So it's not a regret about, should I have stayed in this one? Never. I've never looked back and said, I should have given more time to this. I should have tried. And the only thing I maybe regret was having stayed too long in all of them.
That's what I was going to ask, if that was almost the opposite.
Yeah.
And how do you reconcile that now?
Takes as long as it takes. I think that we have to get meaning out of our suffering, right? I could not do what I do had I not been through what I'd been through. Though, listen, if we did live multiple lives, I can tell you, I don't want the next run to be this difficult. I can tell you that right now. I hope next time's a little easier. I recognize that the intensity of my life in some ways is a compensation, that I'm trying to prove myself to something or someone. I think sometimes I'm not even sure who that is or what that's about. It's almost like the little girl in me saying, hey, I'm important enough to listen to. I'm important enough to pay attention to, kind of thing. But like I said, if we get a second chance, I hope it's not this hard to say. It was hard. I mean, I'm 58 years old. So, I mean, this is it. Definitely there's less time left than there's already been. So I feel grateful at my age to be doing what I love and know I can hopefully do it for a while. And, but I do believe people are helped by it. And I think that to have done what I did, you kind of had to have gone through it several dozen times and seen it in all its variations. And that's what had happened to me. But it's actually not what got me into the work. So that's what's interesting. It wasn't like one of those things like this happened to me and so I want to work on this. I just got into it because I was academically interested in it. And then the realization slowly kind of hit me. I was like, oh my goodness, this is what's happening. And then when I brought it into my life, I'm like, everything that I've taught, it absolutely works. And so that was it's good that I believed in it first before I used it on myself.
Yeah. How much of that experience, though, like almost became part of maybe even harder for you to heal? Because as people have listened to this interview and have listened to maybe other content that you've done, I think a big part of it is once you identify it, then you may beat yourself up over staying or, not recognizing the signs. And you disagree? Yeah,
I think that the whole beating myself up for staying, you stay until you can't stay anymore. And there's some narcissistic relationships I continue to interact with because of practical features around them. And when I no longer have to interact with them for whatever reason it might be, I will be relieved. Because that's the prevailing feeling I have of every single narcissistic person that I no longer have to interact with. I am relieved. I don't miss them. I don't wonder about them. I don't wonder what happened. I don't care. I really don't care. And I think that that's really what this healing, it's not like some of us may have had healthy relationships end, right? They might have ended because of circumstance. You're living too far away. You were too young, whatever it was. And you may wistfully wonder, I wonder what happened to them. Most people have been through narcissistic relationships. Like, I don't care. I hope I never have to deal with them again. And that's how I feel. I really, really don't. I don't care. But like I said, I stayed as long as I stayed. Because of who, in some ways, part of the reason I stayed was nice reasons. I felt guilt. I felt pity, and those came out of a place of empathy. And if somebody said to me, because I'll be frank with you, Lisa, one of the things I always thought to myself is, I wish I was a lot more able to say, I don't care. But if I said that, then I wouldn't be me. That's inherent to me is sometimes, I guess you could call me a sucker in some ways, not others, but because of my feeling of responsibility, my feeling of wanting to make sure someone's okay, even if they've mistreated me, that pays dividends in other areas of my life. It means I'm compassionate and empathic with good people. Empathy is not a switch we turn on and off. So it's not as though I can say be unempathic to that person and be empathic to that person. I can disengage from that person, but even when I disengage from the narcissistic person, I feel a little uncomfortable. It's not easy. Mm-hmm. It's never easy because my tendency is to, I don't want somebody to feel left out or feel bad, but I also know it's the only way that I can preserve myself. Mm. And I'll tell you, because I know I'm sort of tender-minded when it comes to people like that, what it's done is it's actually made me withdraw a lot from the world. And I don't mean in a sort of I'm locked in a room like a hermit kind of way, but if you flip a coin, odds are I'm just sort of locked up in a room somewhere, and I'm pretty content like that because of this history. And that's not unusual in people who've been through narcissistic abuse. I was watching my cat the other day and the comforters are all kind of tumbled all over on the bed. And obviously she's trying to make sure it's a stable surface. So I'm watching her gently put her paw, testing it, will it hold her weight? Then the other paw, gently, will it hold her weight? And I watched how tentative she was being to make sure the surface was safe to hold her. And I thought, whoa, that looks like me, except with people.
Testing the waters and seeing if it's
very
stable.
Carefully, is this stable? Can it hold me? Should I not proceed? And she was so careful. right? I mean, the worst thing she's going to do is fall onto a bed. But so one would say, well, silly cat, that's just a comforter. One would say, silly Ramani, that's just a person. But it's not that simple.
Yeah. Whew, God. Okay, that's a super powerful lesson. Talk to me about just the myths that are out there and having gone through the experiences yourself that you've actually realized what are myths, because I think that we have a certain perceived notion of something, and so we're not necessarily cautious because we're told that, for instance, narcissists are all men.
Right. So that's a common one, that narcissistic people are going to be men. And in fact, in a lot of the way we talk about it, we use he to describe the narcissistic person, and she is the person who's affected by them. However, enough people have told me that they have narcissistic mothers to let me know there's plenty of narcissistic women out there. I've worked with enough men who have been through relationships with narcissistic women to know there's plenty of narcissistic women out there. Now, where it gets interesting is when we talk about grandiose narcissism, that big, pretentious, arrogant, look at me, aren't I great, charming, charismatic narcissism, that's more common in men. That's been shown statistically. But when we look at vulnerable narcissism, the more victimized, sullen, resentful, sensitive, pain preoccupied, I'm suffering more than anyone else, narcissism, that's equal between men and women. And when people describe their narcissistic mothers, they're describing more of that, to be honest with you, than the big, braggy, grandiose kind of narcissistic person. So we do know there are gender differences, but we also know it's not just men. And so if somebody meets a woman who's narcissistic, say, well, they can't be narcissistic because it's not a woman, or they're not, or they might even say, like, I thought all narcissistic people were charming and attractive and charismatic, and this person's none of the above. Vulnerable narcissists are not charming or charismatic. So it's because narcissism has so many subtypes and things like that, that it doesn't always show up the same way, but it's definitely not all men. No.
Yeah, you could see how they could almost like go under the radar then, because for sure, when you think about it, it's presented on TV and things like that, and movies and Succession.
Yeah,
I've heard you talk.
But Succession, Shiv was very narcissistic. So too was Logan's wife, very narcissistic.
Yeah.
So all the women on that show were narcissistic.
Yeah. So bash that myth.
Yeah.
And another myth you have is it's just bragging and arrogance.
It's just bragging, right? So a person will hear someone who's just, you're calling someone narcissistic. Oh, they're not. They're just a bragger. Like if somebody's just bragging and arrogant, and that's their only thing. In other words, that they're still empathic. They're not entitled. They're just that person who likes to tell what we call a fish story, right? I caught a fish and it was as big as my boat and it was so great. And I'm the greatest fisherman. I love fish. I should be the king of the fish world. And they're going on, right? But they're actually like, oh, you want some of my fish? I'll cut some of my fish up to bring it over for your dinner. Like, can I help you? And they listen to you, and they're not narcissistic. They're just, I don't know, maybe ridiculous. They're probably insecure, but it's they're not narcissistic if they've got the other stuff. So I think that when we hear the word, sometimes when someone says narcissistic, oh, you just mean someone is bragging. No. Or if someone is being harmed by someone, like who's in a narcissistic relationship, they'll say, really, is all their arrogance really that much of a problem? It's not just arrogance is actually the half, is only a portion of what causes the problems. I would say what really causes the problems are the lack of empathy, the entitlement, the rage, the need for admiration and not noticing other people. That's the stuff that causes the problems, but it's not just that. And I think what happens is too many people are using this word too easily these days. I mean, TikTok, Instagram is full of people who will say, this person did one thing to me, they're narcissistic. And I'm like, no, this person did one thing to you. I don't know how much time you spent with them. A lot of people say, my person cheated on me, they're a narcissist. No, they cheated on you. We'd have to do a little bit more of a deep dive to determine if they're narcissistic. So I think that we're using the word too dismissively, because it means a lot of things. There's a whole laundry list of things that come under it in order for it to qualify. Like if a person gave you an egg, you wouldn't say, thanks for the cake. It's the same thing, right? So it's right. It's if someone's just bragging, I'm like, that's okay. They're bragging. They sound idiotic, or they sound foolish. They sound dumb. They sound insecure. But I'm not convinced they're narcissistic. I need more.
Yeah, truth to that. Okay, and a myth is that they can significantly change.
So this is the big one, right? And this is where the debate will always be. It's a nuanced debate, but the macro, big, broad strokes is narcissism is not likely to change. So that means their behaviors are not likely to change. And the behaviors are all that matters. Forget their personality, right? Personality doesn't change, Lisa. It really doesn't. And I will tell you that you have a personality, I have a personality. I've made this argument here, I think even on your show before, that my personality is introverted and agreeable. It always has been, okay? And that means that if somebody said to me, hey, Ramani, your life would be easier if you were a bit more hostile, if you were less empathic, if you bragged more, if you were more entitled, if you spent time in larger groups, you should make that change. That's what you need to do. And I'd say, I can't do those things. I mean, I could certainly try doing some of them. Maybe I could do some of that larger group thing. Yeah, sure, I could try that, but then I'm going to get really tired. Or I could definitely try to talk more about my accomplishments, but it makes me really uncomfortable. So I am not going to change. I'm not going to become a disagreeable extrovert. I'm just not. It's not natural to me. Why, if I can't do that, why would a narcissistic person be able to change? You know, and most of us can't do it. And in fact, their personality is much more rigid and cemented and all of that. Narcissism is considered a maladaptive personality because it puts them at odds with other people. So it's even less likely to change, okay? So, and more importantly, because the personality won't change, the behaviors won't change. And the behaviors are what affect us in relationships. Can a narcissistic person go to therapy and address it? Anyone can go to therapy and address it. But the idea of getting through those defenses and chipping away at that and getting at this idea of their insecurity and their shame and teaching them to be mindful and teaching them to be aware of other people and getting through the sensitivity and the impulsivity and the this and the that, that means they'd be going to therapy for a very long time with a really, really good therapist. And what it also means is that they might even make a little change for a minute, but the first time there's significant stress or strain, they don't get the promotion, things don't go their way, something in life doesn't go the way they want, they're going to lose it. So I've been doing this a long time. I've worked with a lot of narcissistic clients. I have seen shifts, but I've never seen enough change that would enhance the quality of a relationship they were in. So no, they don't really change.
And so just embracing that can save people so much time.
And the question I'll put to people, I'd never ask anyone, why didn't you leave or why do you stay? That's their choice. But what I'll say to people is how would you feel if I told you nothing in this relationship is going to change? There's nothing you can do. There's nothing you could say. There's really nothing that could happen to change this person's behavior. How would that impact your decision, whether you're going to stay or go? That's the question I put to people.
If you take away that hope, would you still stay?
Or if you didn't stay, what would that mean? Or would you stay? Or would you not stay? If you stayed, how would it affect you if you knew it wasn't going to change?
Out of curiosity, how many people say that they would still stay when you propose that question?
Most people say, can I get back to you on that? I would say when I look at it over my practice, probably 65% go, 35% stay.
Wow, it's not actually that much.
No.
That's actually heartbreaking.
Yeah, it's hard for so many reasons.
So talk to me about the experience in phases, actually, that you talk about in your book, where you say, like, number one, you stand your ground. Number two, what am I doing wrong? And then number three, it just feels hopeless.
Right. So it's what happens to everyone in a narcissistic relationship. So a person's in a narcissist. This is in adulthood let's say it's a new relationship, and maybe the devalue phase has started. Right. So they're going through that love bombing, and it's all great, and it's idealized, and it's wonderful, and then little by little, the invalidation, manipulation, gaslighting are all showing up, right? And so at that phase, let's say the person in the relationship's gaslighted, right? I never said that, I never did that, you keep putting words in my mouth, there's something wrong with you. And the person's like, that's not true. And they go and they stand their ground, they're like, you're wrong. And they get into the fight with them, right? But when that happens enough times, and as I've said repeatedly, narcissistic people are really good fighters. It will break people down because they're also invested in going back to all that feel good, love bombing, dopamine rich, like, ooh, this is wonderful kind of relationship, right? So the standing your ground phase is when people are still interacting with this relationship like it's a normal, regular relationship. In the second phase, people are confused. They don't know what to do. The key thing is that in phase 2 is when we hope people get therapy. And this is often when people confused enough who are sort of like, what is happening? Maybe it's something wrong with me. They'll come into therapy. I'm having this problem in my relationship. Sometimes people will come into therapy and say, I've become really anxious about my relationship. A lot of people don't just come into therapy and say, I think I'm in a relationship with a narcissist. Some do, but not all. If we get people in phase 2, we can do a lot with them before they get to phase 3, which is really a sense of hopelessness and despair. There's nothing they can do. They're fully blaming themselves. They think all of this is their fault. The narcissistic person may even have a person convinced at phase 3 that you're the one who's behaving badly in this relationship, and I can't believe I'm putting up with this. And people start to believe it, like maybe I'm the narcissist, maybe I'm the bad one. And so phase 3 is tough because by phase 3, people might also be sliding into depression. They might, in more severe cases, it might be complex trauma. Like it really depends on how severe, how long the relationship has lasted, all of that. So we want them in phase 2. Ideally, we want to get them even before phase 1, or in phase 1, we want them to say bye. And I always tell people, like, the genius is the person who stays around for all the goodies and fun and love bombing and then gets out. You know, so it's like you stay long enough to get the goodie bag at the party and then you leave before you have to talk to too many people. Bye, thanks for my gift.
Yeah.
See ya. So it's that. But unfortunately, most people don't do that. Everyone stays at the casino too long. It's the nature of human beings.
And so why is understanding these phases important when we're talking about how to, you know, either heal or leave or recover from a relationship, or whether even maybe you're in one right now? If you're not feeling strong and healthy on the inside, it's nearly impossible to show up and crush your goals and dreams. Take it from me. I ignored my health for so long and it had such a negative impact on my life, my confidence, and my self-esteem. And that's why I want to tell you about Joy Women's Wellness. Joy Women's Wellness helps women like you and me take control of our well-being so we can feel like us again. Joy Women's Wellness will do a simple blood draw and then give you a super in-depth functional health report. And together with your clinician, you can come up with a game plan for how to balance your hormones, get your energy back, and start sleeping through the night. So prioritize your health and just feel better from the inside out. Click the link below and run over to Joy to get your levels checked right now. And guys, if you use my coupon code, they're going to give you 10% discount so you can go and get started. That's choosejoy.co.
Because it's a systematic process. I think that people think that as soon as they realize it, they're going to realize it quickly. The red flags are going to be obvious. They don't realize how gradual it is. If it happened overnight, it wouldn't happen, right? People would pick up on it. But honestly, by the time that phase 2 is happening, it's quite conceivable that your friends and family like this person. They might think this person's charming and fun and generous. They pick up the check, whatever nice things that they're doing, because they're not seeing them perhaps that often. Maybe you have 1 or 2 clever friends or family member that are looking at this from the outside and saying, something about here that I don't like about this I don't love. But by and large, especially if the narcissistic person only sees friends or family every so often, they may have convinced them, or vice versa. If the narcissistic person senses that your friends or family are a little concerned or suspicious, they will isolate the person isolate the partner. So they will say things to the person in the relationship like, you know, your sister talks smack about you all the time. Like, why do you put up with that? Or, you know, your mom really is intrusive in your life. So they put all these seeds of doubt in the person who is invested in making the relationship work. So they believe that they sort of want to believe them. So that might lead them to distance themselves from these other people. And then they'll lose that support and they'll lose those voices that are actually maybe seeing that narcissistic person more accurately or clearly.
So if you understand it, then even if someone's telling you something that maybe you don't want to hear about someone that you really like, love, etc., you're more likely to listen and not dismiss their opinion. Got it. Because there was somebody that I knew that was now just having known you and done all this work, I had no idea that he was a narcissist. It's clear as frickin' day. I mean, he's frickin' textbook now that I look back. And there was one person, it was my husband's mum, so my mother-in-law. She from day one was like, I don't like him. I don't know if she used the word manipulative, but at the moment, I just dismissed my mother-in-law. I was like, well, she's just going to pick on someone, right? So you dismiss their opinion, and now you better believe I'm like, my mother-in-law saw it.
Yeah, so and if you want, remember, many people might be invested in sort of, they want this relationship to work. So they will distance from these voices, like the sister who might see it, or the mother-in-law who might see it, or the friend who might see it, and distance, because otherwise they know someone in their midst is seeing something that makes them uncomfortable, or they might actually believe, if the narcissist also says, like, I don't think this person actually does have your back, and they may start to believe that.
All right, so what would you say then in that situation where maybe you're not clear yet, you still have you're in the love bombing phase, so you can't quite see it yet, and you just feel really good, and someone comes to you, let's say someone's listening right now. What's like a great way to even respond to someone bringing up that sort of thing? Because I'm sure your automatic response is to ignore them.
Or even defend your partner to them.
Oh, yes,
that's the
even
real
worse,
danger.
yeah.
And that's why I often tell people, if you are a support, let's say you're watching someone who's having a relationship where you're seeing red flags. So in other words, this is your friend who's in a new relationship, and that new relationship seems to have red flags. It might even be a narcissistic relationship, whatever. The worst thing you could do is to go up to that person and say, hey, I think this person is a narcissist. Because 9 times out of 10, your friend will defend that person. And in fact, put you to, how could you say that? You're jealous of me. You're competitive with me. You've never wanted me to be in a relationship. I might get really dark, frankly. So if you're in the relationship and people approach you with like, I'm not feeling this, like this is making me uncomfortable, hard as it may be, you have to look inward and say, really, like what would their motivation be to say this, and say, can you ask for more information? Can you tell me what it is you're seeing here that's bothering you? Because it may line up with things you felt uncomfortable with, but you're trying to sort of override. But it's very, very hard to bring people from the brink. And a lot of people often don't want to tell their friend or family member that I'm a little worried about your new relationship, because their fear is that they're going to alienate that friend or family member, right? They don't want to lose that relationship. And so most people don't say anything. And in fact, a lot of survivors have said to me, I got out of the relationship. Sometimes it's like a 30-year relationship. And they'll say, my friends were all saying, oh, we're so glad he's gone. We couldn't stand him. And the person will say, well, why didn't you tell me something sooner? And they said, really, we wanted to, we tried, but we also were worried that there seemed to be a time you would have probably gotten mad, and the person would have to acknowledge, yeah, they're probably right.
Good. And even in that situation, I can imagine the narcissist probably likes it, because let's say your friend has warned you, and now there's a bit of friction between them, and now the narcissist can use that as a way to pull you apart from the friend.
That's right.
That's
exactly right. That's exactly right. And they're going to do that. They're always going to do. I mean, it's textbook how much they will plant some seed of doubt, that they're like, you're better than them, you're smarter than them, they don't have your best interests at heart, they seem to be like competitive with you, it feels like they're always putting you down. The narcissist will find something to say that will cause some level of distance, or at least insert some doubt around that relationship. Yeah.
That's a brilliant lesson tactic as well that can go along with that, because I think that, when we have people close to us, it can lead to hopefully them speaking up that can either help us. But if we're not listening to them, then I can just imagine that's the worst thing, because it's actually compounding itself, that now you're isolating yourself more and more from the people that actually care.
That's right.
So thank you for that. Talk to me now about the emotions that we all go through and understanding those emotions so that we can navigate them. So you talk about the self-blame that we go through. Talk to me about self-blame. What does that show up as? How do we get out of it? So that when we get there, God forbid, if anyone's listening, ends up in that self-blame spiral, that they can actually understand what it is and call it out, and then actually try and not go down that spiral.
Well, everyone engages in self-blame. It's the one universal of the experience of people in narcissistic relationships to some degree or another. That's why the book is called It's Not You, really, because of the self-blame part, where it's just sort of like, people, it's got to be me. And that's where I'm saying, it's not you. It really isn't. And so the self-blame has a lot of roots to it. We can think about it most basically in attachment terms, right? The experience of attachment has always been, usually been a conversation about children. that attachment is a survival need for a child. And a child who has a secure attachment has a predictable, responsive caregiver who keeps them safe, who responds to their needs. And from that safe base, from that secure environment, the child is able to explore and sort of come into their own, but always knowing they sort of have a psychological soft place to land, right? So that's what we want for every child, is a secure attachment. But if you have parents that are neglectful or intermittently available, or make their needs more important than the child's needs, you can see kids who develop what are called avoidant styles, or anxious attachment styles. And these are more these sort of insecure attachment styles. Now fast forward into adulthood. Attachment styles matter there too. If we're, as an adult, we have a secure attachment with someone, we don't panic when they go out of town. We miss them, but we don't panic. We're able to have our own lives separate from them, but also able to comfortably come together with them. But adults can also have anxious and avoidant attachments, and it can very much affect their relationships, right? But the reason I bring up all this stuff about attachment style is that in a child, okay, when the parent is not there for them the way they need. The child doesn't know. The child can't articulate, I need my parent to be this, this, and this. For a child, it's all physically felt. It's all being held in the nervous system. All they know, though, is that their parent is expressing that they feel let down by the child. Why didn't you do this? Why couldn't you be more this? It's very much a conditional love situation. But when a child has those attachment disruptions, when the child has parents who are not meeting their needs or even shaming their needs, the child only has one choice, and that's to blame themselves. Because if they were to blame the parents or see the parents as being the problem, then what? They're screwed, because they need the parent for survival. Attachment becomes a survival need at that stage. By blaming themselves, the child can internalize it and say, well, if it's my fault, I can fix it. The parent gets to remain sort of pristine in the child's view. The child remains safe, but now the child is, I'm not good enough. I'm not pretty enough. I'm not smart enough. I'm not this enough. I need to be better. I need to be better. I need to be better. So I'm safe. Now take that style of thinking. I need to be better to be safe. Press fast forward, put it in a 30-year-old. I need to be better to be safe. And now you get into people who are struggling with perfectionism and trying to be all things to all people and all of that, right? So that's the nature of the self-blaming. Now, let's say that didn't happen to a person in childhood. They actually had a perfectly fine, happy, loving, normal childhood. They get into adulthood. They get into a narcissistic relationship, okay? So they do have a secure attachment from childhood. So they have a capacity for a secure attachment in adulthood, right? They get into a narcissistic relationship. They're confused because they had this love bombing time. Now it's not going so well. And sometimes it's good and sometimes it's bad. And the narcissist is gaslighting them and telling there's something wrong with them. And they kind of believe it. And if you read all of our relationship books that are out there and all the relationship experts, you know what they say? Well, both parties are partly responsible for what happens in a relationship. And a person in a narcissistic relationship internalizes that, well, all the books are saying that, so this must partly be my fault. So maybe I'm the one to blame. And the narcissist is like, yeah, you kind of are to blame, because narcissistic people will always shift blame and put responsibility on other people so they can maintain this perfect sense of themselves. That's how that happens in adulthood. It's more of a cognitive process in adulthood. It's an absolutely primitive, physical, emotional experience if it started in childhood.
Ooh, that is the best explanation I've ever heard of self-blame.
Oh, thank you.
Ever. And do you think having had the experience with so many different narcissists in different areas of your life has compounded that self-blame?
It's what caused it. It's what caused it. Mm-hmm. Yep. If I could be better, then I would be lovable. That could be my motto.
And so for you now, the self-blame, is that like a flag for you, like an identifying marker when it comes up?
Well, there's two pieces to that, Lisa. I have to own that self-blame is sort of my go-to, right? So I'm going to use today as an example between you and I. So it makes it very alive. This morning, I had a snafu. And the traffic came and I had to do another kind of a live appearance. And I said to my assistant, I said, you've got to get in touch with Lisa's people. There's no way I'm going to get to where she shoots in time. I'm going to miss the live. I promised the people I do the live on time. You know, they had agreed to that, and it's a live show. It's going to mess up their show, right? So I said, can you please get in touch with Lisa's people? And I texted you, and I said, I'll pull off the freeway. I'll go home. I'll do that show. And can they start an hour late? So the self-blame was my immediate places. I've let Lisa down. I tried to do too much. I talked for 7 extra minutes to someone in the house that I needed to than I should have. And maybe if I got on the road, actually it still wouldn't have worked. But I immediately went to, I messed up. I'm the problem. I let everyone down. I am so lucky that Lisa's nice, because you see what I'm saying? So the entire narrative is everyone around me is right. I'm wrong, I'm bad, I'm foolish, I'm stupid. Nobody in this scenario was toxic. You weren't, your team wasn't, the other people weren't. Nobody was bad in this. I went right there. So that's why I want to say it's almost like I couldn't have perceived that as a signal, because I was blaming myself. It's not because you did something wrong to me. You were totally fine with it, but I still got lost in, there's even that, I would even say the more primal fear of like, oh, Lisa's not going to want to work with me anymore because I'm asking for all this. It felt entitled to me to ask for an hour more. But that's my point. I went down that rabbit hole, and I'm like, well, there's nothing I can do about it because I can't turn this car into an airplane. I cannot get there in time. And so I hope she's okay with it. So that signal of self-blame there didn't signify anything except an ancient wound I carried.
So obviously, for the record, it didn't bother me in the slightest. Like, when it comes to you, I'm so freaking chilled. Like, I've got the day with you. What am I complaining? And what's interesting, as your friend, I had a feeling that's the emotion you were going through. And actually knowing that about your friend is actually quite a helpful thing.
I'm so glad you brought that up, because it's not like I was saying, we need to start an hour late, but still end on time. That would have been a little bit more of an issue, right? But say, okay, I can work any way you want, just please let me get here an hour late, right? So, but you also know that about me. So it might be the kind of thing where maybe with someone else, you'd be like, oh, come on. Like, we set this schedule, and you might know about something like, oh my gosh, I know how much they're beating themselves up about this, and we can work with this, so let's not make this a thing. That I think knowing this about the people we care about. And I've always said that love, true love in a relationship, means that we're the custodian of each other's vulnerabilities and wounds, that we learn to care for the vulnerable parts of the other. And that means then that everyone's got something. And that if we are truly signing up into a loving relationship with this other person, we listen and we pay attention to learning what those vulnerabilities are. And we're very careful with those things, more careful than we'd be with someone else, because they would have had different wounds, not the same wounds, right? And it's not like you're enabling me saying, oh, just come anytime you want. You can even cancel. You weren't saying that. Like, this was understood that this was going to happen. But that you also knew, like, my friend is probably going to struggle with this because I know her. We can be that to each other. But that's not what happens in the narcissistic relationship. They will weaponize your self-blame and double down on that and say, yep, it is your fault.
They'll use that as a way to gain even more power over you. Ooh, yeah. So being able to work on that self-blame, especially if you're in a narcissistic relationship then, because you're really taking a weapon away from them.
That's exactly right. So once you take away the self-blame, and I don't know that any of us fully take it away. While I'm in some narcissistic relationships I can't get my way out of, I'm very aware of it. But that self-blame almost moves in like it's such a quick physiological reaction for me. I can't really get ahead of it. The difference is it didn't stop me, because there's a time I would have made things worse by saying, I can't let down Lisa. I can't let down the other person. I have to be on the track. So I wouldn't have even thought to ask for that solution of, can we start an hour late? And then it would have been a disaster. I would have been pulled over on the side of the road trying to do the one thing on the phone, and the signal might not have been good, and I probably would have burst into tears and all this other stuff. So my point then becomes is that for a person who's been through it, like myself, I created a trusting relationship with you and your team. That allowed me to build a new muscle of, I can communicate a need. What was my need? I need to start this an hour late. Your team received that need lovingly and said, no problem. So that's hard for survivors to express a need. But if we have a few success experiences with that, we may try it again with other healthy people and slowly find our voice. But where once upon a time, the whole self-blame thing would have led me to make it worse by trying to get here on time, failing that and failing the other show, I've learned then to express a need and actually do it. Does that make sense? That's progress. That's progress.
Wow, and that just shows, I mean, thank you, because I have not been in a relationship like that, you know, I obviously don't have that same experience. So it wouldn't have dawned on me that there's this whole load of, like, basically luggage that comes along with you being an hour late, right? Like for me, I'm just like, hey, it's an hour late. My day's booked for you. In a way, it's not a big deal. And so for me, it's literally it hasn't impacted my, just move on and, you know, I do my day. And so when I think about the baggage that somebody who's been in a narcissistic relationship may carry that no one else sees, that's like completely under the radar, becomes like, wow, fascinating and really beautiful. I think that when you can be open with somebody that can then not use it as your vulnerability, it really does make you connect. Because if I didn't know that about you, imagine I just text back, okay, and I don't know that about you because I'm very busy a lot. I text people okay a lot, but with you, I knew not to text okay.
Interesting. So you see, there was that we call that attunement, right? That you were so attuned to me that you're like, okay, let me give this person a little bit more because this might feel dismissive at a time when a person is feeling perhaps very triggered or upset. And saying all this, I'm so excited. And it calmed me. I have to be frank with you. I can even tell you the point of the freeway I was on at that. I calmed down immediately. My driving probably improved. I knew I was going to be able to go home. And because of that, I got home. I set myself up. I was even able to work calmly for 30 minutes until the next interview started. Had I just gotten okay, it's quite conceivable I would have been on edge that entire time and wondering, oh my gosh, Lisa's going to be so mad when I see her.
And that's where I think a lot of probably the difficulty comes for you in healing, because you're like, well, in order for me to get what I need, you said it earlier, I need to be able to vocalize it. But if I vocalize it, I'm now leaving myself vulnerable for then someone to use it against me.
Well, because of the experience one has, right? We make tracks. How do we learn? It's like things happen over and over again. And it almost creates these like the way wagon wheels used to create ruts in the road. It's the same thing here. It just sort of creates this pathway in our brain. Express need, lose love. Express need, anger comes. Express need, be shamed. That happens tens of thousands of times. That's the only thing you associate with expressing a need. Many survivors of narcissistic abuse try to do everything by themselves to the point of exhaustion, partly because it's realistic. They can't count on the narcissistic person to do anything, but it really leaves them like, dude, they burn themselves out. And so sometimes when people give me the advice, like, do less, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I want to live in the world of doing less. I really do. That doesn't always come automatically, if you will. So, but people who are really still in it, they're in the relationships, they're interacting with more than a few narcissistic folks, they don't have a choice. They have to, or the things won't get done, because if they express the need to the narcissistic person, not only is the narcissistic person not going to meet the need, they're going to scream at them. So you get 0 for the price of 2, basically. So that's not a very nice experience. And so that, in all of that, it's that awareness that relationship between expressing a need. And so to me, healing means I work with folks and teach them to express the need. Sometimes that happens in therapy. So basically the client will say, I'm so sorry. I feel terrible asking this guy to change my appointment time. I'm like, sure, no problem. Or if they can't, I'll say, you know what? Tomorrow that time's not available. If it comes available, I'll tell you. And if it doesn't, I'll let you know too. And I'll say, I'm so sorry the time didn't become available. But then we'll talk about it in the session, because I'll say, how did that feel? And how did it feel that I couldn't accommodate? They said, no, you were cool about it. And I said, and then when I'm able to change it, they had the success experience of expressing a need and the need being met.
Oh, we just touched on self-blame. We're going to go to the next one, which is another emotion that I think can really trip us up, is shame.
Shame is sort of the mothership in narcissistic relationships, because both the narcissistic person is feeling shame and the person in the relationship is feeling shame for very different reasons. So the narcissistic person, part of the reason their behavior is so problematic is all of this shame, right? For them, the shame is that they will be found out to not be perfect, to not be the most powerful, right? It's as though someone's going to come and take off their Superman cape and they're just going to be a regular person. That's the source of their shame. Because they feel so much shame and it's unprocessed, they project it onto everybody else. So anybody who's in a relationship with a narcissistic person is in the splash zone of their shame. Then you have the person in the relationship who feels shame at being in a relationship that's unhealthy, who feels shame at not being able to express their needs, who feels shame that they are keeping their relationship secret from other people because it looks ridiculous, who feels shame that they don't have the courage to leave or they're not leaving, who feels shame that they're thinking terrible thoughts about someone they're supposed to love and that they're disloyal. So the shame that's happening for the survivor is quite different than the shame that's happening for the narcissist. We never behave well when we're experiencing shame. Shame is sort of it's a public emotion, right? It's the feeling judged about the things we've done that are quote unquote bad, but we're often taking things that aren't necessarily bad things, like feeling like we can't share our relationship because it'll be judged, because we're afraid it'll be judged. That's the public piece of it. That's the shame, right? Shame leads people to hide. Shame leads people to act out. Shame is probably the core of all bad behavior on the planet. If we could address shame, that's Brene Brown's entire body of work, then we would be in a much better place. But the shame of the survivor is made worse because there's people in the world who are saying, you're overblowing this narcissistic thing. You have no right to diagnose your partner or your parent or whoever the hell this person is. Why don't you just leave them? What's wrong with you? All of that drives their shame.
So in those, knowing all of the drivers of shame, and that when you're in a narcissistic relationship, you have probably more of that, even more so, right? Because like you broke down, you're hiding things, you're having to, lessen yourself, especially if, let's even say, in the public eye, you're seen as this really strong, badass woman. That must be even freaking harder.
It's terrible. I'm so glad you brought up that point about people who, to the world, look badass, strong, tough. The number of, it's interesting, even in Hollywood, the celebrity world, more and more people are coming out and being transparent about their narcissistic relationships. Sometimes they're calling them emotionally abusive, but you're seeing people talk about it. People who seem like the most together, the most with it, like top of their game, worth a gazillion trillion dollars, are like, you're going through this too? And I think that this is what we need to remember, is that while I think that the impacts of this are far, far worse for people who don't have resources because they don't have therapists they can turn to, they don't have lawyers to help with divorces, they don't have new apartments they can move to, they don't have those things. So they often have to endure it. They don't have the support they need, all of that, that it still operates the same way. And that I think sometimes when you are sort of up here and you're going through this, the shame about, I should be smarter than this, right? It isn't about smart. Nobody is being taught this. And you know how I feel about this. I think that the field of mental health has let people who are in these relationships down. We haven't given them the vocabulary. We're more quick to shame people like, well, I don't know, like, let's not get so focused on their personality. Let's focus on you. No, let's not focus on me. If I go outside and I get wet because it's raining, it's because it's raining. It's not because there's something about me that's creating wet. It's the same thing, that you're in this relationship with this person. They're an issue. They're the stimulus. And listen, the good therapists will talk about it. They'll say, yo, your husband sounds like narcissistic. And that will give the person saying, okay, I'm not crazy. Like, thank you so much. That can literally take therapy and push fast forward button for like 6 months worth of work. And now you've got something to work with. People say, okay, I'm not out of my mind. And Lisa, people say, how do you know? They're just telling you their side of the story. Something changed since I trained to be a therapist and now, which is now there are cell phones. People say, take a look at this email. And you can tell it's from someone else. I can see, and I'll read the email. And I'll think like, it's almost so that there must be some narcissism AI generator that's generating these emails because they all read the same way, and I'm like, it's very clear. They will bring in emails. They will bring in text messages. They will bring in voice recordings. it is unmistakable to me that the person they're in a relationship with is narcissistic.
It never dawned on me that you personally didn't even have that back in the early days.
No, when I first started training in graduate school, it was the early 1990s, and we didn't have none of this. I mean, you'd have to walking with a tape recorder in your pocket. Remember how big
Yeah,
those used to be?
geez, you couldn't hide
This
that
huge,
shit.
big, like this massive thing on your belt or something. We didn't have cell phones. We didn't have, I mean, unless people, it's not going to have a letter, you know what I'm saying? Like no one's going to, I guess every so often maybe someone had a letter, but it's not like the quicksilver communication. So we didn't have that. And I think that the existence of that has changed the game for us almost having an evidence base, like read these texts. And they'll almost watch my face go from like, they'll watch and I'll say, this is horrifying. And they'll say, I'm so used to getting texts like this that it's not even registering as horrifying to me anymore.
So new technology like text has actually helped us.
It has helped and harmed us, right? Because I think what it's done is it's created one more tool for them to engage abusively. Where it's helped in therapy is it's given us the evidence base of what's happening in this relationship. Because when we talk about something, it changes. But I have one client who would just keep bringing in these voice recordings. And literally I say, we only have 50 minutes. And the client would say, I don't care. We're going to spend 20 minutes listening. This client would press play. And I would make notes, and it was horrifying. But the client said, watching your face as you listen to this was healing for me. Because this is what I've grown up with. This is all I've ever known. And for you to hear this and for me to see this on your face, I now know I'm not crazy. The problem is that people will bring in the email, the recording, or the text, and they'll say, I'm embarrassed. I'm so ashamed. Because basically they're like, I'm still in this. And look at this, so it doesn't necessarily alleviate it. It's just it's more of a validation, but that shame piece is deep. And a lot of people feel as though, because the narcissistic gaslighting will leave them feeling as though they're part of the problem. They're complicit in this. They're engaging in this. In fact, that they might even be a terrible person because they're thinking disloyal thoughts. That they're saying, I hate my father, or I wish I never met this horrible man that I married or something. And the challenge is that those thoughts leave people wondering if they're just terrible people. And that's a concept we call moral injury. The idea that somebody feels like they did a bad thing.
Actually, and even just thinking even through this, I would think about, as if I was to replay, I think part of me would beat myself up for not having said something different, or, like if you're hearing the abuse, and then you hear, or if I had then heard myself saying, okay, like I think that would dredge up some uncomfortable feelings that I didn't stand up for myself, that I didn't push back. And then I think that actually would probably cause more shame for me.
And that's the challenge. And so this is where the education part of working with clients who are experiencing narcissistic abuse is, these are the reasons why you didn't respond. There's a reason for this. And that's that nervous system stuff and those nervous system responses and that sense of safety and the fact it's going to go nowhere. When people have a map for why they kept hitting the walls they were hitting, it helps them feel like, okay, this is actually how I behaved is what's to be expected kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. So the other emotions that we have to embrace during this period that you said, that you've really eloquently spoke about and written about your book, is confusion and despair.
Mm-hmm. So confusion, as somebody you love, is being invalidating, and then you have a nice weekend, and then they scream at you on Tuesday. The confusion is, it's the backing and forthing, right? It's the, just as a person's like, this is a terrible relationship, I need to get out. It's exactly what Rebecca's analogy was. They catch you just as you're about to hit the ground from the 100 stories up, right? So it's that being pushed off and being caught, being pushed off and being caught, that the person's like, I don't know what I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. And when we have this, especially the longer term the relationship, the life we have this life together and we have this together and we've been through this together. And especially if you have things like kids, any of those things that can really bulk up that connective tissue. People are confused. Am I to blame? Are they right? They told me I'm losing my mind. Maybe I am. I do have a history of depression. Maybe that's why I'm like this. I don't pay attention. I've been distracted. Maybe I'm disorganized. On and on and on. It is an indoctrination process. So people are confused. They'll have moments where like, this doesn't seem right, but then they'll have moments of like, no, it's right. And then you add to that, people don't want to change the status quo, that they are afraid of like what would happen if they ended it. They're afraid what would happen if they stayed in it. So people are chronically confused. And because of that confusion, they start to believe that they're somehow impaired, and that plays into that gaslighting.
And so how about the despair?
Well, the despair is this idea that it's never going to get better. It's never going to change. I'm always going to suffer. And here's where people might be suffering frank depression, pretty severe anxiety. At the most severe, there might be people who are even experiencing sort of thoughts of self-harm or ending their life, in which case it is absolutely essential that a person seek out emergency services, whether that's calling 911, checking themselves into a hospital, whatever it is, it's getting help immediately, because this can bring up that sense of helplessness. And people going even through these divorce procedures will say, it's the most helpless I've ever felt because I couldn't see an end to it. And it seemed as though no matter what I said, nothing was being heard and it was going to be harm to my kids or the future or whatever. So that's what the despair is. It's just sort of the sense of there's no coming out of this. This is forever going to be a kind of a living hell. And it can change people can literally develop mental illnesses around that stress.
Did you ever feel that type of despair where you felt like, is this ever going to end?
All the time. Yeah. And I became very depressed, and I struggled with all kinds of issues like that because I didn't know what it was, Lisa. See, the one way the despair gets lifted a little bit is knowing what it is. It doesn't make it in a way any less hard. I mean, if somebody tells you why someone's screaming at you, they're still screaming at you. If somebody punched you in the face and told you this is why I punched you in the face, it still hurt, right? But it does help you understand, like, this isn't your fault. It's unfortunate, it's bad luck. And for some people, again, the despair is worse for people who can't get out, right? For financial reasons, for cultural and religious reasons, for reasons of fear of being alone because they really don't have support, that kind of thing. But the despair is very, very pronounced under those kinds of conditions because things can't get better. For some people, the despair is a catalyst. Like, they hit sort of a rock bottom. And you'll see sometimes survivors of narcissistic relationships do hit their rock bottom, whatever that looks like. And that getting to that bottom of despair, for some of them, is what ultimately motivates them to get out. For some people, it's what ultimately motivates them to be forever indifferent to the narcissistic person. I mean, I've worked with many people. Listen, LA is an interesting example. Real estate here is so expensive. So a lot of people can't afford to buy a home, or they can't afford rent. And there are people, I literally remember working with a woman who said, the two of us are living in this house. Each is waiting for the other to die. None of us is murderous, but whoever dies gets to keep the equity in the house. No, we cannot afford to, if we sold this house, even though they'd make a lot of money, those two halves wouldn't be enough to acquire housing and to be close to their work the way they needed. And if they left, they also couldn't afford rent. And so they're like, we're sticking it out. And she's like, he's got his part of the house. I've got my part of the house. We have times we both use the kitchen at different kinds of times. We have labeled our stuff in the refrigerator. If he dies, I get the house. If I die, he gets the house. And we're both waiting for the other one to die. Whoever dies first, the other one's the winner. She said that in as many words. She wasn't despairing. She's like, I know what I'm dealing with, and it sucks, and we're here in LA. I'm like, there's places in the country that are cheaper, but she still had a job. And I think she had grandchildren or something like that she wanted to be close to, who are in the area. So she made a decision, and she wasn't despairing. She was very matter-of-fact about it. She said, it's inconvenient. I can't stand the man. I always know his schedule, so I'm always out of those rooms when he's there. So I don't even want to look at his face.
I don't like ever judging anyone. Live the life you want, but that sounds so
tough.
Unhealthy.
It is unhealthy. It is unhealthy, and it can affect a person's health. But these are the kinds of bargains people are getting into because they're saying, I can't, like, especially if you're older and saying, like, I'm going to run out of rent money at some point, right? And my retirement money won't pay the rent. Or, if I take all the money and I put it into buying a small place, if I could, and there's nothing they could afford. They said there's no small place that exists at the price point that they've got. You see what I'm saying? So these are this is the reality of it. Like, that's why I'm saying I don't sugarcoat this, and I'm not going to sell some optimistic, like, everyone can go out and find their truth. And no, the real estate market is not going to support you in that. The world is not, family court's not going to support you in that. There's realities in this mess. And so that despair is partly a sort of a byproduct of the painful realities. The challenge with despair is if it has turned into, for example, major depressive disorder, a person needs care for that. They need to be treated for it. Depression is an illness. And like any illness, it needs to be treated. Otherwise, it's going to have more long-term effects on that person physically and mentally.
Yeah, as you've been breaking all of these down so eloquently, despair was the one that really hit me on that, like, oh God, is that at the point, like, does suicide go up when it's despair? And
yeah. And there are survivors who have, gotten to that point. And that's what I'm saying. I really get tired of people minimizing what an issue this is, because this is a big issue. And if you haven't been through it and don't understand the helplessness and the almost like this, again, that nervous system freeze response, person doesn't know what to do. They don't feel empowered. They can't. There's so many reasons there is despair. But even for people who stay, like I said, that woman who's stuck staying, she said, we're not in a relationship. I don't talk to him. It's just sort of a workaround. There's other people out there who say, we're in this together because we're still in this because it's just going to make it easier in some ways for grandchildren and all of that. Like they're making choices and they said those grandchildren are the most important thing to me. So even though I can't stand living like this, seeing those grandchildren uplifts me like nobody's business. And so I'm able to get through another day with a narcissistic person. But they'll all say, in an ideal world, I would not be with this person. I wouldn't be living with them. And most of them say, and I won't give a damn when they die.
And part of me, like, actually, my heart bleeds a little more because it's like they're sacrificing again for something else. You're sacrificing for the grandkids. You're sacrificing for the kids. And it's like, God damn, when are we going to stop sacrificing for everybody else except for ourselves?
Right. But unfortunately, these relationships are often embedded in systems. And that's the challenge.
Yeah, I think that's where it becomes even harder. Talk to me about your 3 R's.
Right. So the 3 R's are rumination, regret, and we'll call it euphoric recall. R's for the recall. So let's start with rumination, because that's probably the most common fallout for people who are in a narcissistic relationship or even coming out of it. Rumination is the constant obsessive thinking and replaying of the relationship in your mind. It's over and over and over again. Now, rumination is an interesting thing. If rumination gets you to a solution, like sometimes if you really puzzle over something, let me think about this. And you can't let it go and you're like, oh, wait a minute, I have a solution. That's rumination doing what it could do. For a person in a narcissistic relationship, rumination will get you nowhere because there's no, right? The person's like, okay, if I did this and then, but they said this, why did they say that? Like, wait a minute, what was on their phone? What time did their phone ping last night? But like they said they were going to ruminate, because there's so much dishonesty in these relationships, so many breaches of trust, so much invalidation, so much shifting of the truth, gaslighting, all of that. You're chronically confused, so you ruminate. And rumination does again, it's not getting you to a solution. And when rumination doesn't get to a solution, that's where you see sort of more despair and sadness and all of that.
Because you're just sitting in it?
Because you're sitting in this dead loop that goes nowhere, right? But rumination also distracts people. When you're ruminating, you're in your head. So you're not paying attention to your work. You're not paying attention to other relationships in your life. You're not paying attention to caregiving responsibilities. Many people ruminating may not engage in good self-care. They're not taking the medications or taking care of their health or exercising or eating well. It's just churn, churn, churn. So they're missing out on their own lives because they're ruminating about this relationship. It is incredibly common in narcissistic relationships. It's a very common part of other mental illnesses too. Anxiety, depression, all have strong rumination components to them, but it is central in people who are experiencing narcissistic relationships or even healing from them. Sort of like, are they moving on? How did they get away with this? And the biggest thing that people ruminate about is injustice. This was so unfair. They're getting away with it. Our friends still speak to them. Their family still supports them. And they've moved on with someone else. They're already getting married to someone else. Like that part of it, the injustice piece is often a big blockade to people. Not only do they get stuck in the rumination, it can block their healing. The second R is regret. And these relationships are sort of a minefield of regret. People wishing they never met the person. People wishing they got out sooner. People wishing they'd been born into a different family, whatever it may be. So the regret about what this did to a person's life, it's understandable Because invariably, anyone who's ever gone through a narcissistic relationship, it has harmed their life in some way. It has set them back. It has wasted time. It's caused internal wounds. It's caused them to doubt their own potential. Those are big wounds that stick with a person. So that regret, and if the growth doesn't help a person almost frame their regret in a context, like, this was my journey and I've learned, this is my journey and I now see I can be more discerning. It yielded the kids I want, whatever it may be. When the regret can't be contextualized, it can get stuck into the rumination. Those two things are related. And then the recall, especially the euphoric recall, is a problem. Narcissistic relationships are funny like this. If we look at some of the work on how people recall things, the memories we tend to hold on to more stridently are our negative memories. We remember bad stuff more than good stuff. And that's and it makes sense evolutionarily. If we can remember where the poison berries are, we're not going to eat them again, or we're not going to harvest our berries from there.
Yeah.
If you look at our evolutionary history. Now that remembering bad things, we're like, okay, I'll remember not to go drive that way. It keeps us safe. The memory system was then being used as part of the sort of safety survival, like, remember the bad stuff so we're not in danger.
Otherwise you keep touching the hot stove.
Correct. But we've evolved past that. And if you look at, some of the, like, Rick Hanson's work is a great example, who wrote Buddha's Brain. He's like, part of meditative practice can we engage in recall of the good things in our life? This is where we see practices like gratitude and, reflecting on blessings in life. So here's where it gets interesting for survivors of narcissistic abuse. Heaven forbid we do anything in the right order, right? But the one thing that happens is, as part of the trauma bonding experience, people who are survivors or in these relationships or getting out of them selectively remember the good stuff. They will say, but we had a really great vacation in Miami 15 years ago. I remember working with one woman in therapy. She'd been married like 35, 40 years. Marriage was a disaster. I mean, the husband's a raging malignant narcissist. But the thing that kept coming up was, on our third date, we danced in the rain in Miami. If I had to listen to that Miami rain dance story one more time, thinking, this man has betrayed your trust in ways that I didn't even know you could betray trust. And that was what she kept going back to. But that euphoric recall, that perfect night, that perfect sunset, that perfect hotel, that perfect restaurant, you laugh, and then the song that you were both talking about comes on, like, perfect. People get stuck in that. People go throw away 20 years of their life over one night.
What up, homie? I got something free and new to share with you right now.
How often are you visited by that negative voice in your head telling you that you're not smart enough, that you're not good enough, experienced enough, not fill in the blank? One of the most powerful things you can learn to do in life is to turn that negative voice into your bestie. And I want to teach you how to do that and so much more in my 4 Steps to Becoming Confident workshop. And guys, the most amazing thing is you can actually register for completely free for this workshop. So click the link on your screen and I'll see you on the inside. And what is the brain doing? Like, is that also a protective mechanism? Like, if you're in a relationship that could be perceived as dangerous, the protective mechanism is holding on to that one happy moment so that it doesn't feel like always threat?
It's really part of the trauma bonding piece, the justification. It's a way to maintain the status quo. One way we understand narcissistic relationships is through the lens of something called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is the tension or the discomfort in us that happens when all the pieces don't fit right? Like, you find out that your friend is going to prison for embezzlement. Like, this is my best friend and they're going to prison for embezzlement. I'm like, oh, this doesn't feel good because the pieces don't fit. Make sense? Mm-hmm. So in a narcissistic relationship, the cognitive dissonance is created by, and we had fun and we had these great dates and we moved in together and they're really cute and they're super charming and they're so smart and they went to Harvard. And they're really mean to me and they say terrible things to me and they keep flirting with my friend, but they're really hot. That's cognitive dissonance, right? That's a tension. So how do we make cognitive dissonance go away? We make the pieces fit. And how do we make the pieces fit? We ignore that they're flirting with your friend and invalidating. We just focus on the stuff that allows us to stay in the relationship, to maintain the status quo. It's like the fox and the grapes, right? The fox couldn't get the grapes in the Aesop's fable. They were the most beautiful, juiciest grapes ever. And the way the fox was able to walk away was to tell himself that the grapes were probably sour. Otherwise, he would have had to forever wonder, like, damn, I couldn't get to the grapes, and I'm so upset about that, right? That's not going to feel comfortable, like sour grapes. So in this case, it's a flip on that, where it's sort of, we have a great relationship. It's really good. Yeah, flirt with my friend. Actually, my friend is kind of inappropriate, and so that's a her thing. And that thing he said to me, that was on a day he was really busy at work. Pieces fit, no more tension. And so all of that means that this to stay in the relationship, the person almost selectively has to pick out this good stuff. And then they get stuck in this euphoric recall loop, especially when it comes to go time, like the decision to leave the relationship or when the relationship has fallen apart. That can really kick in.
In real time, it's funny how I don't often think about my ex who was very verbally abusive. I'm not sure if he's technically a narcissist, but there was definitely a lot of things that we're talking about today has shown up in my relationship with him. And it was interesting because we were together for almost 4 years and it was just very turbulent, on, off, screaming matches, wild sex, like really just turbulent. And I remember once, Dr. Ramani, we were walking in the street and there was those, those pillars, those like concrete things that cars don't go down the streets. I remember this clear as day. We were walking by and we were holding hands and our hands broke because of the pillar. And so we broke hands. And he's like, no, wait a minute. He backs up. He grabs my hand again and he's like, I don't want something concrete to get in between us. And we walk off. And I remember that to this day because I was like, that is the most romantic thing everyone's ever done.
That's right. That's right. Like I said, that's why I say people will lose 20 years over one night.
But that one little thing that you hold on to for the rest of the relationship, it's just insane. And I mean,
you believe you're not going to find it anywhere else, right? That it's such a special, evocative, especially when people have magical thinking about that moment. Like we met at 11/11 on 11/11, or like we kissed and there was a shooting star, or the restaurant where we had our first date happened to be like whatever, some significant something or other. Like there's these magical moments will lead people to believe that this relationship was destined. And that destiny piece will also make people fight for this longer.
Oh, yeah, that never even dawned on me. So with the 3 R's that you just broke down, I can see how that can definitely keep us stuck. Mm-hmm. Talk to me about, I think you call it recovery of the lie. Is that right? Where you have to go back and look at moments where you were lying to yourself. Yeah. So I think there's a story about the photo from Italy.
Yeah. So, this is it's recovering from the lie, right? That's what it was called in the book. And it's this idea that people start sort of messing with their own heads in these relationships. And they'll find a picture. Okay. In the story I give in the book is a story where the person finds a picture from a vacation to Italy. They look at the photograph and them and their partner were big smiles on this yacht, whatever, bright sunny day, sunburned, happy. The person remembers that it was on this trip that they started becoming suspicious that their partner was cheating on them. And upon coming home from the trip, in the months that followed, they came to find out that these pings and dings that they're hearing on the cell phone at all hours because of the time difference were actually because this person, their partner, was cheating on them even before the trip to Italy. So what happens is the person looks at that and will say, I don't even know if I was happy. What was I? But that moment when that picture was taken, you didn't know that this person was having an affair, right? This was before that you heard those cell phone pings, right? So as far as you're concerned, you're on this romantic trip of a lifetime to Italy. You're snuggling on this beautiful yacht in the Adriatic Sea. You're sunburned, you're glorious, you had sex that morning. That smile, you were happy in that picture. But in the background of that picture, in the backstory of that picture was, at that time, your partner was already cheating on you. So it becomes the biggest mind you know what, because you're like, I was smiling he was cheating on me. I didn't know. And then I found out. The person doesn't even trust that. So they were covering from the lie is you were in Italy, you were happy in that picture, and then it all fell apart. You were working on what you had, and it's just helping people see, because people then doubt their entire history. And it's hard for people to say, like, I was in a relationship, and it was really great until I found out that they had cheated on me 4 times in 4 different ways. I'm going to give you the example of someone who, actually, I hope you have on the show one day, actually, is a woman named Jen Faison, okay? Jen Faison had a very popular podcast called Betrayal, and then a Hulu series by the same name on her experience of betrayal. The one thing Jen says that sticks with me, and she's an amazing, interesting, fascinating, wonderful woman, was the level of betrayal. Anyone who's watched the Hulu show will know why I'm saying this, and I don't want to give away the punchline if you ever talk to her. The betrayal Jen experienced, and I've been doing this for a long time, was the greatest betrayal I had ever heard. And she said, until the day the betrayal got discovered, by the way, it involved law enforcement. And that's how she found out about the betrayal. So until the day the betrayal was shown, she was convinced she was an extraordinarily happily married woman. No red flags, no sense anything was wrong, no like, oh, these are all the problems. She thought she was happily married. And then this all was unveiled. So this is not uncommon for people to go through, not at the level she did, obviously, but people to be in a relationship and believe they're happy, then find out something else, look back at the pictures and really say, what the hell was I? And you were working with the facts you had, and you were having an experience, right? And it's an experience, and your experience is based on the context and what you believe the context to be. And on that day you were happy, and that's a fact. Now when you look at that picture, you may feel sad, but you feel sad now. You weren't sad then. You were, and it's sort of like bringing people back to, because it's about doubting your whole history. And if you doubt your whole history, you become really destabilized. You can only feel what you feel, and as the information comes in, you're feeling changed. It would be one thing then if the person said, I'm still happy. I look at that picture in Italy and I'm still happy, even though I knew he was cheating on me. Then we need to talk. But it's not unusual to look back and say, I don't know what I was feeling. I'm like, oh, you're smiling big. And the person might say, actually, no, I was smiling big, but I wasn't happy. I was miserable. And so you could own that too. In the example I gave in the book, the person didn't yet know the person was cheating on them, or had just learned that they were cheating on them. Yeah.
So do you advise them to try, as if you can, hold on to that memory as being good?
No, it's understanding, because what people do, it's not that they want to remember the memory as good, is they look back and say, my whole life was a lie.
Right.
And your whole life wasn't a lie. You were, with what you had at the time, you were having an experience.
But
right?
you perceive it as it was a lie.
You perceive it as a lie. A person will say, I look back at that really, really poignant moments, like being in the delivery room with your partner, the partner who might have subsequently cheated on you a week after you got out of that delivery room. That moment when your child was put in your arms and you were with that child's parent, you were happy in that moment. That's a fact. Don't doubt that experience. Because when you doubt that, you're more apt to doubt yourself in current time.
How do you not doubt that in that moment?
Because you look at the picture and say, I was happy that day.
So you just need to reorient yourself to what you felt that
happy
day.
Now. Yeah, that day I was happy. Baby came, baby was healthy. We were excited. And then the next week I found out news that would blow up my world. If you took a picture of me that day, I wouldn't have been so happy.
But separating the two, I think, would be very difficult, but I can totally see why that would be super empowering. Because the idea that your whole history is a lie is hard to swallow.
Correct. And it destabilizes you in present time because you don't trust yourself anymore.
Yes, I think that would be the hardest thing, is that as you're taking the next photo in the now, you're smiling and you would start to question, am I going to look back at this photo and wonder? And now you're just in your own head and
That's
spiraling.
Right, rumination.
Yeah, there you go, all the way back to rumination, you're right. Dr. Ramani, as always, girl, I can speak to you forever. Where can people find you and your amazing book, It's Not You?
So again, and the beauty of this conversation, we haven't even begun to hit the top of all the stuff on healing here. There's much, much more than we talked about. So please, anywhere you buy your books, Barnes and Noble, your local bookstore, Target, Amazon, wherever you want, you can get this book. And you can also find me at drramani.com, on YouTube, where we have new content every single day. A lot of it mirrors what's on the book, but a lot of it is just sort of a daily reflection on what's happening in the world of narcissism. We also, if you want to do a deeper dive into healing, I have a healing program, monthly healing program for people who really want to do journaling and have sort of a support mechanism and workshops and all of that. You can find all of that on my website.
Before you waste even another year feeling stuck in your life, then keep watching so that you can finally change everything.
Gratitude is wonderful. Gratitude is a great practice, but it can also make us belittle the hard or the pain or the uncomfort of life. And so if somebody is sitting there and they don't even know where to start, like first, how can you create a safe space? Does that look like blocking off an hour of your time and sitting in your car where you don't have distractions? Does it look like standing in the shower where you don't have your phone to numb yourself out? Does it look like taking a weekend trip or a staycation or booking a hotel room? Does it look like sitting in your closet floor while your kids don't know where you are? Like, what does that look like? And it's fascinating to me because if I look back on my decade of entrepreneurship, the biggest times that I had, like the greatest evolutions or breakthroughs, were the times where I gave myself margin and space, like time to think. When I cut back on work and I said, okay, now I'm gonna paint or I'm gonna do different things. And so when we don't create margin and space, we don't have room for creativity. We don't have room for questioning. We don't have room for exploration. We don't have room for curiosity. And I think all of those things are required to actually change.
Oh, that's so hard though when you've been spending so much time blocking out the feelings, right? So you even said in the book, like we talk ourselves out of our own feelings.
Yeah.
Talk to me about that.
Yeah, we have numbed out our feelings. And here's kind of an example of a way that we've done this. So even with our best friends, so I have some friends I've been friends with college. We went to college together and we'll like voice text and we talk about everything, the good, the bad, the ugly. But I've noticed that whenever we have something hard in our life, we're always like, but it's not that bad because you're doing so much more. Or it's not that bad because I know of a single parent. Or it's not that bad because I know someone has it worse. And our culture has this beautiful awareness, right? We are so aware of how fortunate we are, of privilege, of, situations where like other people do have it massively worse. There's no denying it. But when we lean on that or when we compare our hard to someone else's hard, we belittle what's actually happening in our life. I do it all the time. I had a really hard parenting week and I was just like, I feel like a terrible mom. I just don't know how to mother right now. And then I was sending it to my friend and I was just like, tell me it gets easier. Like, tell me. And then I was like, but I'm so lucky and I'm so, and we do that. And it's like, when did we enter into a space where we can't say, this is hard right now, or I need help right now? And so when it comes to emotions, I feel like we do a lot of the same thing where it's like, I'm sad, but I should be happy because of this. And so I've had to teach my daughter, like, if you're sad, it's okay to be sad and like to feel it, because when you allow yourself to feel it, then you can start to move forward. If we're just trying to bury it, we all know it erupts at some point, whether it's with our spouse or children or a team or whatever that looks like. And so I've tried to help her, give her tools to feel her feelings and then move through them. So even before I left for this trip, I left a note for her and it said, remember, and I drew pictures because she can't read the words. It said, smell the flowers and blow out the candles to take deep breaths. Because she'll say, Mommy, show me how to do it. And so I'm like, sometimes we need to remember how to smell the flowers and blow out the candles so that we can just sit in our feelings without trying to push them or get past them or move through them too quickly.
God, that's so powerful. Because we really, you think you say default, right?
Yeah.
Like we all think of happiness as being our default.
Yep.
And so if we're not there, then something is wrong. But yet so much of my own life the beauty has come through the struggle. Now look, it is all in hindsight, because when you're struggling, it doesn't feel right.
Yes.
So what do you tell yourselves in those moments where you're feeling down?
Yeah.
And you know, right? Like, because there's a big gap between intellectually knowing and then feeling it.
Yes.
So when you're feeling sad and you may be saying, well, I should be happy, you know that well, hang on a minute, happiness isn't the default, but it still doesn't feel real. Is it the deep breaths that then soothes you in those moments so that you're not being overwhelmed by the fact that you think you should, quote unquote, be happy?
Yeah. Well, even when I was in my tough motherhood week, for me, I have to turn and like serve others. Like, so I was like, you know what? I'm going to reach out to 3 other moms just to say, I'm thinking of you. Hope you're doing okay. Is there something with the moon cycle going on? Because our kids are crazy, but like, we're in this together. Because a lot of times I think what I've found with emotions is we feel lonely in them, right? And with the world we live in, everyone's showing up with their happy faces online. And so when we're feeling sad or frustrated or anxious or overwhelmed, it feels isolating. And when I feel isolated, I then go into that narrative of like, something's wrong with me. I'm broken. It's me. It's nothing else. It's just me. Something is wrong. And so I found that like when I invite people in or share or even just reach out to other people and I hear like, oh, you're not alone, or this resonates, or like, I'm in the thick of it too. I'm like, oh, nothing's broken. This is just a part of the process. I posted these Instagram stories because I had like a marathon work day, and Coco woke up at like 3 a.m. and was literally asking me what the Northern Hemisphere was.
At 3 a.m,
yep,
as you do.
And for 2.5 hours, why do people sleep on their backs? Where do dogs sleep? Do cows stand up? The questions coming out of this 3-year-old were insane. And I posted this Instagram story the next day, and I was like, oh my gosh, I'm probably going to delete this, but like, I am just exhausted, and I love being a mom, and I love my work so much. And it just feels like so much love to carry sometimes that it's so hard. Because it's like, I feel stretched thin because of the fullness of life. So nothing is bad and nothing is broken and nothing is wrong, but like life is full, and I don't know if I can always carry that. And I was like, I think I'm going to delete these, but I just wanted to share where I'm at. Well, my DMs just flooded with people like, oh my gosh, I'm in it. I'm in the thick of it. And I was like, oh, I'm not alone. Oh, this is normal. I think sometimes we just want to feel a little less alone and like a little more enough. And so when it comes to feelings, it's like, if we know that we are not the only ones, it kind of gives us permission to like sit with it a little bit longer, to like not waste the waiting of like trying to get back to whatever default we're trying to get back to.
And do you think that was so powerful, but do you think that we keep trying to go back to the default because it's a comfort zone? Like, what is that?
I think it's just because it's our programming. We've been taught to be happy, healthy, smile, show up, all those things. And of course, happiness would be a great destination to land on. But if we don't release the pressure that it has to be our go-to state at all times, I think our lives would actually be fuller. Because, they always say like the dichotomy, like you don't know how rich happiness can be if you haven't experienced the depth of sadness. And when we're like just kind of trying to maintain a status quo, our lives are like bland, right? I feel like there are times where you can look at your calendar and be like, who booked this? Or like, I don't want to do this thing. Or like, why did I say yes to this thing? And it's like we go through these days just to get through them. Like we're not actually in them. I think that's a problem.
Yeah, God, that's so powerful. And so you shared a bit of your story where you lost 2 children.
Yeah.
And so to this point of happiness.
Yeah.
It's going to be a hard question for me to ask, but I hope you're okay to go there.
I'll go there.
When you have tried to have a child and you've already lost 2 and now you're on your 3rd one, and it's like you feel the blessing. And in moments that you just said where you're exhausted, and this blessing is now a strain, and this blessing is now tiring you, stressing you out, definitely maybe not getting in your way, but definitely in competition with where your hours are going to be spent on your business and stuff like that. How do you own those moments without feeling guilty about them?
I would love to know the answer to that question.
Okay.
I feel like it's interesting because motherhood is like the greatest gift in my life. And I have always, like, when I decided I wanted to be a mom, I wanted to be a really good mom. And it's wild because I have so much confidence in saying I'm a really good mom. Like, I am a
You are
great
freaking amazing
mother. And I'm there and I love my kids. But it's interesting because even lately, I can find myself questioning, like, is it the right time? Should I be working? Should I, like, even last night, I'm in LA to be here with you. And I went to sleep and didn't turn on Coco's baby monitor, and she woke up yelling for me. And, like, that freaking, like, breaks your heart, because you're like, I should be there. I should be here. I should be there. I need sleep, but I should, and it's like, I should. And it's like, what is balance? And I've found in my journey that, like, balance doesn't work for me. Like, I have to blend things, because I can't be one person in one moment and another person in the next. And for me, I tried to do that. Like, I wanted to be like Mom Jenna and CEO Jenna. And I am just Jenna. I am a whole human being. I mean, we were like eating lunch and I'm pumping, but we're talking about business, and like, this is just the dichotomy of what it means. And it's fascinating because women with children who work feel guilty because they're not with their kids. And women who stay home with their children feel guilty because they're not contributing or working. Mm-hmm. And it's wild because I've even had to get so careful in my language around using the words like working mom, because every mom is working. Mm-hmm. But like a mother with a career, or like how I even phrase it, because it is such a sensitive thing. And so it's interesting, like on those challenging days, because I love entrepreneurship. I'm a lifestyle entrepreneur through and through. Like, I love the lifestyle that entrepreneurship has afforded me. And I'm so content with not growing every year, with not, one-upping myself. I'm like, if I can maintain my lifestyle and maintain living my life, I am living the dream. And so most of the time I have so much flexibility. Like, I put kids down for naps all day. I feed Quinn. I'm like, have fun. I'm like typing with one hand. Like, that's the life that I've chosen. But it doesn't mean it's easy. And so it is wild. And it's also really hard because it's like, I prayed so hard for these kids. And so I see them as just like the best miracles in the world. But that doesn't mean that it's not hard still. Like, joy and gratitude can exist with challenge. Mm-hmm. And it's like, how do you find the space to live in that? And it's uncomfortable.
It's so true, and it's really uncomfortable. And the reason why I asked that question is because I really think it's relevant on every aspect of someone's life. It doesn't matter 100%. If it's kids. Yep. If you're trying to go for something, a sports career, or starting a business, a family, and you try and you fail, and you try and you fail, and you try, and then you succeed. But there are moments of exhaustion. Yeah. There are moments of tears and unhappiness and sadness and what the hell am I doing? Like, in every aspect. But when we fight hard for something, and we tell everybody this is what we're gonna do, and then in those moments where we've got it and we're shattered, we feel guilty about saying how tired we are, because most people actually will respond, well, that's what you wanted, right? And so now you're like, I have no space to have an exhale, to do the blow out the candle, the smell the roses, blow out the candle. I've got no space to do that, because now I feel guilty about saying when something's tough. Yep. And I think that's doing such a disservice. And going to like the parenting thing, I can only imagine what that feels like when it's a human being. I know. Right? Where it's like, I've been wanting this child, and yet it's freaking difficult. And there are times where I need help. I'm struggling. And we feel like we are, and I think going back to the very first question of how do we get stuck? It's these little things, those little moments where we don't feel like we can exhale. We don't feel like we can talk to people because there's no one there to greet us.
Yeah. Oh gosh. One thing that I started doing, actually I did it to you last week, but in reaching out to people who have big things going on, whether you just had a baby, you're launching a book, you're starting a business, is not projecting what I think they should be feeling. And so one of my friends had a baby recently, and I messaged her and I said, on a scale of 1 to 5, where are you at today? Are you needing encouragement, or are you feeling on top of the world? Because I remember when I first had Coco, I was just so grateful. Like, she's safe, she's healthy. Like, I mean, it was better than $1 million. But people would be like, oh, you must be so exhausted. You must, and they were projecting that. And I was like, oh, I actually, like, I'm doing really good. And then there would be times where people would be like, isn't this the best age? And I'd be like, oh my gosh, this age is so challenging. And so I've tried to start approaching conversations and being like, tell me where you're at and what you need before I project how you should be feeling or how I think you are feeling. Because when we do that, it doesn't give space. Imagine telling a new mom, like, you must be overjoyed, but really they're overwhelmed. They would feel crazy to say, actually, I'm like in a really dark place, or, you know, and so I've been trying to like start conversations of like, tell me where you're at so I can converse accordingly, so I can support you accordingly. And I think that's really changed a lot. And I think if we did that for ourselves too, of like, instead of thinking how I should feel, like, where am I at on a scale of 1 being miserable and 5 being on top of the world and vibrant, where am I at?
And when you answer the question honestly and you realize you're at like a 0 or a 1, how do you then start to change that? Because when you asked me, actually, it's interesting. I think it was like a 1 to 10 you asked me. And I went to put 1, and then part of me felt guilty about putting a 1 because I was like, well, I don't want her to think I'm really that bad. So let me just put a 3. I can't remember what I ended up answering you. But it was interesting how I processed my answer to you in order to, in fact, in real time, I'm actually processing this now. What was interesting is it allowed me to process, am I actually feeling that bad? Or am I just tired? In fact,
it was your check-in.
In fact, oh my God, I have to talk to you about this. Girl, it is the best line in your book. Do you need to change careers or just take a nap?
Yes.
I actually laughed out loud because it's so true. When you get to burnout, you're like, I need to move places, I need to move countries. What the hell am I doing with my career? And then you take a nap and you eat well and you sit in the sun and all of a sudden you're like, I love my career.
Isn't that funny? There's a story in my book when I hit burnout, and I literally like wanted to take my laptop and like Control-Alt-Delete the whole thing and like chuck it out the window. And thank God I took like some melatonin and like took a little snooze and like woke up the next day and was like, oh, I'm okay. And I always come back to this idea of like, what we need is rest. And it's like that rest, don't quit idea of like, we quit and give up so easily because it's hard, or we're tired, or we're lacking resources, or whatever it is, when really we just need to slow our pace down. Or we need to remember that like we've already come so far, or we just need to take a break or take a step away. And so many people, I think, are walking around with this guilt of not having achieved what they thought they would, or not following through on their commitments, or not achieving the goal, when really all they needed was a break. They just needed to rest. And I sometimes recognize that in myself, where if I have a idea I'm so excited about, but then I find myself in it and I'm like, oh, what was I thinking? This is crazy. I'm like, I don't need to quit it. First, I just need to rest. I interviewed Nastia Liukin, who's an Olympic gymnast. And I remember, I will never forget part of her interview where I asked her, were there days that you ever wanted to quit? And she goes, oh, there are so many days, but my parents, her dad was her coach, said you can only quit on a good day. And I think about that a lot, because if you asked anyone on a good day, would you quit? They wouldn't, right? I mean, 99% of the people would be like, hell no, this is amazing. And so I've always thought about that when I'm having a bad day, because I'm like, would I quit if this was a really good day? No. Okay, then I just need to rest.
That's a true test right there.
Yes. And I feel like it's such a powerful thing, because when we think about the story in my book where I'm talking about like you don't have to move zip codes and all these things, it's like so many of us, and I feel like even culturally right now, we've experienced burnout, like as a culture, through what we've all been through all the uncertainty. It's like we're just burnt out on uncertainty, right? And so it's like, where is the breakthrough? And I hope that for some people, the breakthrough is in them understanding what they are willing to do and what they won't do. and like what they want to do and what they will refuse to do, and what boundaries will look like and how they want to move forward. And I feel like we have this beautiful invitation right now to craft a new life. Like we kind of get this fresh start. It's like why we love Mondays and January 1st and the start of months is like we all are craving a new start, like a fresh beginning. And it's like any day can be your fresh beginning. But like, what would it look like if you were well rested and like awake to your life and like awake to the vision and like willing to progress? And we always use this line in my book. It's like where the woo meets the work, because so many of us are believing that we have to be in one camp or the other. And I really, truly believe that there are two camps, especially for women right now. It's the manifestation side, you know, dream it and it'll come. Just say what you want into the universe. I'll bring it to you. And the hustle side, the wake up at 5 a.m., grind a little harder, don't give up, be relentless in your pursuit. And these camps have become polarizing, like everything else on planet Earth, of like it's one or the other, it's this or that. And I want more room for the and. And so one of the words and lines that we use in my book often is it's where the woo meets the work, where we can have these manifestations and these visions, but we also are willing to do the work to make them happen. I mean, it's like actual proven science that manifestation. I had Dr. Tara Swart on the podcast, and her interview was fascinating. And I was like, tell me about manifestation. Does it really work? She said, the reason why it works is if you keep the vision close enough to you, you will keep moving towards it. And it's kind of like when you are on the market to buy something new, like you're going to buy like new shoes or a new purse or whatever it is that you like to buy, you all of a sudden start noticing them, right? Yeah. And so if you have that vision close enough, you start to notice that things can work and things are happening and things can unfold or invitations are coming your way. And so I want to invite people to recognize that like it's not one or the other, it can be an and. And when we hold visions and when we come out of this, I hope we have a vision, we can start to put the work behind it.
Whew, okay, there's so much that you just said there. First of all, I love the line you even say, because your podcast Goal Diggers, you're like, but look, be a goal digger, but also be a goal getter.
Yes.
And that's the second part that a lot of people miss.
Yes.
And so I love that you said that. It's like, look, you need the vision in order to know how to act, but you also have to act.
Yes.
And then leaning on what you just said about boundaries, I really want to go down in here, because I really want people to know everything you say, you are the epitome of practicing what you preach. So sometimes I'll text you, or you'll text me like, sorry, I just woke up from a nap. Yeah. And I'm like, I love your life.
I know.
Like, but here's the thing, it wasn't accidental.
Yeah.
And that was the thing. Like when we talk a lot and, you know, I just had a nap or I had a massage.
Yeah.
You work hard at your work.
Yeah.
But you also give yourself utter grace and beauty to take the nap, to do the rest. Yeah. And you are such the epitome of that. And to do that, you said your hero is boundaries.
Yes. Let's talk about it. Boundaries are fascinating to me because I feel like there was this line back in the day in Sex and the City, and when I was emo and had AOL Instant Messenger, I remember I used that line in my AIM profile at one point. But it's something about like how boundaries keep things out. Like we believe that boundaries are like these fences that like keep things or people or opportunities out. But I have learned the exact opposite, that boundaries keep me in my life. They keep me in the moment. They keep me in alignment. They keep me living in integrity. And I really learned this so much when I became a new mom, and I realized that like I was lacking boundaries. Like in 1 minute, I could be like typing an email for work and then I'd be feeding a baby. And I recognized that like if I want to truly blend these things, I have to have boundaries. Because I don't want to get a text message when I'm with my family out at the zoo and all of a sudden I'm thinking about work and it pulls me out of my life. Like I want to be in the moments that I'm in. And so when I create boundaries, whether it's with my team or relationships or what I will say yes and no to, it really keeps me living in integrity with what I say are my values. Because we all say that certain things are our values, but our actions do not line up, right? And that's just the human nature. I'm not perfect at that, but I try really freaking hard. And it's funny because, you know, I'll hear people talk about their values or like family first or all these things. Well, like you look at their life and it's like, when do they even have time for their family? Or like, you know, I enter entrepreneurship to have freedom, but I'm like tied to my work. Like, how does this happen? And so I love boundaries. I exercise them, but I do it with grace and I do it with conviction. And here's a good example. When Coco was born, I literally blacked out my entire calendar and said, I'm going to say no to everything for an entire year because I didn't know what motherhood would feel like. I didn't know how I would feel. I said no to everything. I told my team, don't even let me see emails. I don't even want to see opportunities because they're going to feel sparkly and shiny, and nothing is shinier than being home with my kid. And it was a beautiful thing because I wrote a template and it basically said, thank you so much for this invitation. I'm so flattered or honored that you reached out to me. And I just want you to know that I'm going to politely decline, but it is not in any way a reflection of you, your idea, your invitation. It is only a reflection of me living out my values. If I say yes to you, I'm saying no to what matters the most to me or what I say matters the most to me. And I just want you to know that I am cheering you on. I wish you the best. And I hope that in doing this and doing it in this way, it invites you to live out your values in a stronger way. And never once did anyone get angry with me. We're always so worried about disappointing people. In fact, I think that response inspired more people than disappointed them.
So what are the steps to get there? A, acknowledging that you absolutely need the boundary in the first place of where things aren't serving you.
Yep.
And then how do you start to implement it? Because everything you said is so beautiful, right? Showing someone grace. Girl, I'm so freaking with you there.
Yeah.
Because when you think about it from the flip, when someone's putting a boundary on you, how would you want them to say, hey, you're crossing a boundary, stop doing that? Or would you want them to go, you know, I'm really doing this because it's for me. I'm so happy. Hopefully this helps you. It's like, wow, shit, that's amazing.
Yeah.
So it gives a great perspective. But some people are too petrified to even say to themselves, you deserve to set a boundary.
Yes.
So how on earth did you even realize that you were worth it?
Yeah. I mean, the thing is that I feel like we are so afraid of saying no because we are afraid of losing momentum. Whether that's momentum in motherhood, career, relationship, we worry that setting a boundary is going to pause or slow down our success and that we'll never be able to catch back up. It is like this fear of God in us that if we pump the brake, we won't know where the gas pedal is. And I think that the reason that is because so many of us feel like our success had to have been a fluke, or that we were lucky, or that someone gave us our big break, or that we're never going to get this opportunity again. We got to strike while the iron's hot. Well, the iron is hot when you turn the iron on, friend. You know? Like, I have seen so many women who are like just running and they're like, I'll slow down when things slow down. Nothing's going to slow down. Has life slow down, you know? And so it's like, when did we stop trusting ourselves to know how to turn the iron on?
I'm going to steal that, by the way. That is
do.
so amazing.
Please do, because it's like, it's so wild. So when it comes to boundaries, we refuse to set them because we are just waiting for our next big break. We are just waiting for invites to keep the momentum when we don't realize like we were the source in the beginning. Like other people's things aren't working for you because they're not from you. Like they didn't come from you. And so with boundaries, I mean, first things first is like, pull out your calendar and do an audit. What do you never want to do again? What are you mad that you agreed to? What do you see on your calendar and you're like, I never want to see that again? Now, I mean, some things you've got to keep, whether it's like taking your kid to soccer practice or like doing the laundry or whatever, but there are
I'm going to challenge you on doing the laundry.
Preach, you're right. But there are so many opportunities for us to create like a not to-do list. It's like our lives are like constant to-do lists. And there are things, so like for me, being in alignment was like, the first step was when I was a wedding photographer, it was like, I'm going to take 1 weekend off each month, which in the Midwest, the wedding season is 6 months long. That's like literally cutting out a chunk of your income. But I was like, I don't even enjoy summer anymore. I don't even enjoy it because I don't have time for it. I missed friends' weddings. I missed family cabin weekends. When I was with my family, I brought my computer with. I was constantly tethered. I was never off. And so what is one small way that you can do that? And usually a calendar audit will show you like, here's what your life is saying about your values, your priorities, and your goals, because this is what you're doing. And how we spend our days is how we spend our life. And so I would start with that and do a not to-do list. And the second piece of that, and there's a chapter in the book about this, where it's like, what is your enough point? And a lot of us are overworking ourselves because we're so afraid of like scarcity. But we don't recognize that there is an enough point where what we have is enough, what we've earned is enough, that our work is enough. And I have pivoted so many times in my career. And the only way I've ever been able to pivot and try something new was saying, I am only going to book the bare minimum to pay the mortgage or to buy the groceries or whatever it is. And I'm going to just free up my time. My time is more valuable than my money right now. And when we work out of our place of like our enoughness, we feel the safety and security necessary to then be able to have the freedom for creativity and margin and rest. But so many of us don't even know what an enough point is. We don't know like, what is the bare minimum that I need to do? And we also don't know how to cut it off when we hit that point, right?
Right.
So it's like more is more. More is not always more. More is not always better. And so I love, and you guys talk about this all the time too, is it's like money will only buy you happiness to a certain extent. And I remember the day that I hit 6 figures and I was like, I thought this would feel different. I am so burnt out. I'm exhausted. I would way rather make $50,000 and have weekends free, time with my husband. Like this, I have money in my bank account and I can't even enjoy it. And so I had to establish an enough point. And I told you, I remember, I literally made this like color-coded spreadsheet and sat him down and I said, I'm going to tell you something and I just want to know if you agree. And I said, I am willing to cut my work in half and go back to making $50,000 a year because I was happier. Are you with me on that? Are you okay with me? And he looked so relieved. Where he was like, you're right. We don't need more. We've got more than we ever needed. We were happier. You were more available and present. And so it's like every time I've hit those thresholds, I'm like, what is my enough point? What do we need? And how do I just meet my basic needs and then claim back my time?
And that's what you do every time.
Every
It's just
time.
like my enough point.
And now I don't need anything. So now it's like I work out of a place of like, I want to do this, not I have to do this,
Ooh.
which is crazy.
How much has that changed how you feel about yourself, how you show up every day, how you think,
I
your
love it because I don't
confidence?
have to do anything.
Right.
Like I know that I could like hang up and like go live in the woods for the rest of my life. And that would be a really good life. But I love what I do so much. And I show up because I love it. But it also gives me that feeling of like, I don't have to do anything.
Yeah.
So anything you see me doing from this point on is because I want to. And that's exciting.
I love that. Go, you've been through such an evolution of like careers and the way you show up every day. And in that, there are things that you've done that you're like, I said I'd never do this, and now I do. I said I'd never do this, and now this is the best thing that's happened to me. So many people get stuck in the contradiction.
Yes.
So many people will spend the rest of their lives
Yes.
not addressing what they now want
Yes.
because they fear or the judgment of the fact that they said once upon a time they were going to do this.
Yeah.
Go, this freaking haunts me. How on earth do you approach those things and make change? Whether it's going against judgment, going against opinion. Because man, if we can figure out this thing where people can go, oh my God, yes.
Yeah.
I can give myself the freedom to say, I said I'd never do this, and now here I am. And I'm gonna own it.
Yeah. It's funny, there is this idea of identity foreclosure.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's the reason why we hang on to our jeans from high school. It's the reason why we finish degrees when we know they weren't the right choice. It's because we're like, but I already paid for this, or I've already spent 2 years. Why would I waste it? Why are we wasting 2 more years when we know it's not the right thing? And so it is crazy because, and I experienced this in real life when I left my corporate job that had like a 5-word title that sounded really impressive and became a photographer, and people treated me like it was a hobby. I went through this total identity crisis of like, how do I tell people that like my business is important, and how do I make them understand that like I'm really good? And it was wild to me because I was like, man, like we lean on things like as absolutes, right? Like the executive position or the CEO title or like all these things sound so important. And it's wild because so when Drew and I got married, we were 23 and we were like, we're never having kids. I mean, we were very confident in that. And we were married for 5 years, and we loved our lives. We loved our freedom. We loved sleep. We loved all of these things. And we were just very content. And I loved it. And I loved that time in our life. Both of our parents were married for 5 years before they had kids. And so it was kind of a great thing where neither of our parents were like in a rush. But I think it also devastated them when we were like, nope, we're not having kids, never. You've been through that. And then my heart started to change, and it was weird because I'm like, I have spent a lot of time and energy and money trying not to have this thing. And now I've changed my mind. And I also didn't know what Drew would think, like, because we had had these conversations. So you guys went through the reverse.
Literally, which I'm fascinated to
Literally
talk
the
to you
reverse.
about
You
this.
wanted 4 kids and you were going to be the mama at home. And I was like, never. And now we're like sitting here flipped. And I remember, I think a big thing for us is when our brothers both became dads and we got to see someone so close to us change and step into that new identity and also kind of see the reality of like what that meant. And I remember kind of being like, I don't know, I think I might want this, and like really worried about it because I was really at a good place in my career. And, you know, there was just things where I was like, these are the opportunities I've waited for. Am I going to ruin it all by now having changed my mind? And I start off that chapter saying, like, remember when our yearbooks, when you were like, never change, I can't, you know, I love you for who you are, all these things. And I wish that the messaging was like, I can't wait to watch you change. I can't wait to watch who you're going to become. I can't wait to watch you evolve. And I feel like my life has been this conscious meeting of myself often. Like I am like getting to know who I am all the time. It's like every big thing, every milestone, everything that has changed, every new project, it's like, who am I? And like, do I like her? And like, how can I get to know her? There's a quote by Ruby Carr who's like, I will only be this version of myself right now. Like I want to sit and be with her for a while. And I love that because I think we often box ourselves in. We kind of there's a line in the book where it's like we put ourselves into like personality Tupperware where we're like trying to separate, like these are the pieces of me and these are the ways I describe myself and like this is who I am, where it's like, who can I become? And so when I changed my mind and when Drew was on board and also had changed his mind, you know, it was one of those things where it's like, well, I'm going to eat my words. And I mean, I had recorded a podcast of like 10 reasons why I won't be a mom.
Oh my God.
Like,
I hadn't heard
there
that.
was I was committed.
Oh my God.
And there have also been podcasts where I'm like, I will never write a book.
Okay, so these are perfect. How on earth do you start to listen to the whisper? Because I think that's where it starts, right?
Yeah.
It's not like all of a sudden one day you go, oh my God, I actually wanted kids. Everyone, hey, I know I said I didn't, but now I do. It doesn't happen like that, right?
Yep.
It starts with this little whisper.
Yep.
This little inkling, this little feeling.
Nudge.
And yeah, the nudge. And then that gets a little louder and a
Yep.
little louder. I'm looking for that pivotal moment where people go, I'm going to shut this, lock it in a box and throw away the key because I never want anyone to hear the thoughts of how much I want to change, but I'm never going to. So many people do that and they'll spend the rest of their lives so dedicated to that one commitment they made way back in the day.
Yeah.
But you didn't.
No one remembers those things. We remember those things. Someone the other day, I was on a podcast with her and she was like, I'm so embarrassed because I announced to my audience that I was going to do a podcast with this person and it fell through and I'm just so embarrassed. And I was like, I'm a very close follower of you and I have no idea what you're talking about. And I was like, you know, it's like we all forget, like we have our own microscope up to our own lives, right? Everyone is also head down in their own life. No one is paying that close of attention. There have been times in my life where I've made decisions based around other people or like, I want to move, but like, what if I move and then like everyone moves away? Or like, I want to stay here because of our community. And it's like, no one else is making decisions based on me. So why am I making decisions based on everyone else? And like, for me, I love contradicting myself because I think it shows evolution. Like there are things that I listen to that I said as like absolutes. And there are things even that I wrote in this book where I'm like, 10 years from now, I'm going to look at this and be like, oh, you sweet little Jenna, you had no idea. But I think that's because I have poised myself proudly as a student of life. I am in life school. And life school means that I'm going to be learning. And if I'm learning, I'm growing. And if I'm growing, I'm evolving. And that's the human experience that we're missing. And so if we can like poise ourselves like at the starting line without disqualifying ourselves from the race before it even begins, that's where we actually make progress. So I love contradicting myself, because to me, there's no greater compliment than somebody saying, you've changed.
I love that so much. And so really I do believe it's a framing, right?
Absolutely.
So in those moments, telling yourself that is so important. Because, so in fact, telling yourself, like, there's so much power. And just right now, I want everyone at home to go, yeah, I'm a walking contradiction.
Yeah.
But like even saying it like that, like, yeah.
Yeah.
Because I think it does take that ownership of it.
Absolutely.
And for me, to what you're saying is, because I used to, it used to hold me back. I was like, well, I can't say this out loud. I've just told everyone I want 4 children. God, I can't tell people I don't want kids now.
Yeah.
I've literally told my husband I want 4 children.
Yeah.
And now I've changed my mind. I realize that what I do now is I express that I recognize I'm changing my mind.
Yeah.
Like there's
yeah.
something, like, but back in the day, I never would. I would have tried to hide. Of like, hopefully people don't remember this part of me. And hopefully, and it's that fear of I hope people don't remember this part that brings up so much anxiety that doesn't allow me to own this other part.
Yep.
But in leaning into the admission
Yeah.
of the fact that you're growing and that you pride yourself on change.
Yeah.
Like perspective is everything, girl, and you
Yeah.
just freaking like laid it out so well and beautifully right there. Because I really do think it's those moments, like this whole discussion.
Yeah.
It's about what gets us stuck.
Yes.
What are the things that stop us from progressing, from moving forward, from having the life we really want? And like that last little nugget of gold is so strong.
Yeah. It's so interesting to me because like if somebody told me like I'm going to change my mind, I would be like, awesome. But it is wild to me how like hesitant we are.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things where it's like, I always think about this. This is such a dumb example, but I think it's relevant. Where people will like log off of social media and then they'll come back and be like, I'm so sorry I was away. And I was like, nobody knew you were away. And yet we're all walking around with like guilt and shame that like we're not doing what we said we would do, when really maybe it was never meant for us. And when we think about our lives, it's like no one is like in your life, like looking at every move you make and like analyzing it except for you. And it's like, you talk about this so much where it's like, we are our own worst critic. Like we are the narrators of our story. But there's this part in my book where it was like, what if you were the director of your own life? Like you didn't just cast yourself as the extra or the helper, but like you actually imagine like the scenes of your life as the director and the lead. And like, what if you could like help orchestrate what you really want to have happen? And so it is so fascinating to me when people get so wrapped up in other people's opinions, because I absolutely fall into that trap. I don't know if you felt this way, but like when writing the book, it's such an internal process. It's such like a cathartic thing. And then people start reading it. And like, even my mom came over when I was like in the final manuscript days. And like, I was like, you can read this one chapter, but like, that's it. And like, we're writing, but like, it's this experience. And then you're like, I'm releasing it and now people are reading it. And I was like, am I going to be like so crushed if I get like a negative review? And I was just like freaking out about it. So I asked myself, I said, what are like my favorite books, like the best books? I go up on Amazon, pull it up to read reviews. Oh, they had negative reviews. That's hilarious because I freaking loved that book. And I like reminded myself that like every person who's out there doing something great, even the people that I'm like, oh, they would never get criticism. I'm like, that is just a part of the human process. And so it is so funny to me when people get so wrapped up in like what people would think about a contradiction, or what people would think if you changed, or what people would think if you pursued something new. So much so that it holds you back from doing it. Man, we're like missing out on life.
I agree. And I think that a big part of it, though, is that it's a reflection of us, right? And so it's actually saying to us, well, hang on, what are the contradictions maybe I'm ignoring? Or what are the contradictions that I'm not paying attention to? You know, like all...
Yes, absolutely.
It like shines a light, on our lives. And I think that by saying to someone else, or like, oh, you're not going to do that. Like, why is that a belief system that you have? Or even just to your point about apologizing on social for disappearing.
Yeah.
It's like, why do you feel the need to apologize? Like, what is it? It's like, well, I didn't want to let people down. but like keep digging,
Yes,
right? Keep peeling
yes.
back the onion, because I think ultimately it reveals something within inside you that maybe
Absolutely.
you're feeling like, well, I really struggled here, and so my struggle meant I disappeared, and so maybe I let people down, but I felt like I let people down because maybe I let myself down, right?
Yes.
Like actually freaking unpeeling to see why you feel the need to apologize to, it doesn't have to be unsocial, right?
Yeah.
To anyone,
Yeah.
or to even say your contradiction that I'm changing.
Yes. Well, it's funny to me because I often think about, like, for me, this is my personal opinion, but I really think that I feel shameful when I have a goal or vision and I'm like, I'm going to commit to this thing and I fall through on it. And I feel so much shame that then I don't even want to try it again. It's like self-sabotage. Like for me in my life, a lot of times it's health, where I'm like, I'm going to eat super clean. I'm going to do this. I'm going to like, and then the minute I like reach for a DQ dilly bar, which dilly bars are really good from Dairy Queen, just in case you want to know, when I was pregnant. Anyways,
Your face just lit up as well.
when I reach for a dilly bar, I'm like, oh, I'm not living into who I said I was. And I feel this like immense guilt and shame. And we all kind of put ourselves on these shame cycles where it's like we get inspired, we overcommit, then we fall through, then we feel guilt, then we feel shame, then we get inspired, and we keep doing this over and over and over again. And the problem isn't that we aren't following through on our commitments. The problem is that we're not seeing that even small progress is progress. And like for me, I have to build up my belief. And I do that by these micro actions and by like the tiniest commitments that move me closer. Like I would rather inch my way to a dream than try to sprint and burn out. And I feel like I live my life like that. Like even when I plan out my work and stuff, it's like, let me just inch closer, because I know that if I burn out, I'm done. Like I will lose my passion. I will lose my excitement. And so we forget that like any progress is still progress, and we hold ourselves to these impossible standards, and then we get down on ourselves when you don't follow through on them. And so I really think if we like asked anyone, like, what are you feeling guilty about in your life right now? It would be things that we told ourselves we would do, but we weren't able to follow through.
I love that you said, it really stuck with me. Maybe this is the name of your next book. No pressure.
Yeah.
Inch closer.
Yeah.
Like, I'm all about mindset. What are the words I'm going to use in moments of struggle? That's it. Like, I don't judge myself on having the thoughts. I don't judge myself on feeling down or feeling defeated. It's just, what am I going to do when I get there?
Yep.
Inch closer is freaking powerful.
Yeah.
I'm going to steal that as well. That's so good. Because in moments where I feel like I should have done this, I should have done that, the shoulds, right?
Yeah.
I'm going to tell myself, but Lisa, you inch closer.
Yeah. Just a tiny bit. It's funny, when I was in the book writing process, and if you read my book, the epilogue is my favorite part, the story of the massage therapist and the mouse.
Yes, I was so happy you put that in the book.
I know, and you'll have to read it too. That is my favorite part. Like when I got to read that for the audiobook, I was like, oh. Anyways, this massage therapist was a part of my life throughout the book process. And I remember I went to see her to get a massage, and I was in the writing stages. And she said, I keep envisioning this tree.
Click here right now to learn the life lessons from a woman who is 103 years old that you don't want to learn too late. The story that you share in the book, where you talk about your husband Bill of 46 years, writes you a letter